The piano was playing something soft, something that didn't know yet what kind of night it was about to become. I remember the sound of my own breathing. I remember the white linen tablecloth, the half-empty wine glass I hadn't touched in 6 minutes, and the way the candlelight kept flickering even though there was no wind. I remember all of it with a kind of terrible clarity, the way you remember the exact moment before something changes you forever. And I remember him. He was seated across from me. He hadn't asked to sit there. He had simply sat, like a man who had never been told the word no, and had therefore stopped expecting to hear it. Dark tailored suit, no tie, a tattoo edging just above his collar, dark ink against pale skin, as though whatever he was hiding wanted to be seen. He was looking at me with eyes so still they felt dangerous. Not the danger of a man who might shout. The danger of a man who never has to. The restaurant had gone quieter since he arrived. I didn't understand why. Not yet. I only understood that he was looking at me like I was a problem he had already decided how to solve. Then he leaned forward. Just slightly. Just enough. From this moment on, he said, his voice barely above a murmur, each word landing with the precision of something calculated. You're my wife. 45 minutes earlier, I had planned every detail. That's the part that still stings when I let myself think about it. Not just that it fell apart, but how carefully I had built it. The reservation at Altitude, the rooftop restaurant on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago, had been made 6 weeks in advance. I had worn the red dress. Not because I always wore red, but because Daniel once said, early in our relationship when everything still felt like a beginning, that I looked extraordinary in red. I had remembered that. I had chosen the dress for him. I sat at the table by the window at 7:02 p.m. Our reservation was for 7 o'clock. Daniel was always 2 minutes late, a small, reliable habit I had filed under the category of things I found endearing. The city spread out below me like a circuit board, all light and geometry, Lake Michigan a dark ribbon beyond the skyline. The maitre d' had given me a menu. I studied it without reading it. I was thinking about what I was going to say. We had been engaged for 14 months, and I had been patient, careful, supportive. Tonight, I wanted to feel celebrated. Just once. 7:09. I checked my phone. No messages. I rearranged my cutlery. 7:14. I sipped water. The piano player was performing something from Debussy. The couple at the adjacent table laughed at something private, and I looked away. 7:21. My phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen, expecting an apology, a traffic excuse, a picture of a gridlocked cab. I got 3 sentences. Elena, I can't do this anymore. I can't marry you. That was it. No call. No explanation chased immediately by guilt. No ellipsis indicating more was coming. 3 sentences, and then silence. The way you might text someone to cancel lunch, not dismantle a future. I set the phone face down on the tablecloth. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip. I have always been the kind of woman who does not cry in public. Not from pride exactly, more from a deep, practiced instinct for containment. My mother was the same way. She used to say that a woman's tears, in public, are always misread. So I sat in the red dress I had worn for a man who sent a breakup text, in the finest restaurant in Chicago, on what was supposed to be my anniversary dinner, and I held myself together with both hands. I was doing well until the waiter appeared. Will your guest be joining you this evening? He asked. I looked at the empty chair across from me. No, I said. He won't. The waiter gave me the particular expression of someone who understands exactly what they have just walked into and deeply wishes they hadn't. He retreated. I breathed. And then the room changed. It's the only way I can describe it. Not dramatically. There was no sound or obvious signal. It was more like a subtle atmospheric shift, the way the air pressure changes before a storm while the sky is still technically clear. The murmur of the restaurant dropped half a register. Nearby conversations didn't stop so much as pause. The sommelier, who had been mid-sentence of the bar, went quiet. I turned toward the entrance. 2 men in dark clothing had come through first. They were big men, carrying themselves with the particular stillness of people whose job is to be ready. They didn't look at any of the other diners. They swept the room with their eyes, quickly, methodically, the way you check a space before something important enters it. And then he walked in. Seo Min-jae. I didn't know his name yet. I only knew what I saw, a man who occupied space differently than other men. He wasn't the tallest person in the room, but he moved like he was. Dark tailored suit, immaculate, no tie, collar open, just enough to show the edge of something dark at his throat. I realized, a tattoo. His face was composed with an almost inhuman stillness. No smile. No theatrical scan of the room to see who was watching. He already knew who was watching. Everyone was watching. He simply didn't care. The maitre d' materialized at his elbow, as though summoned by gravity. Min-jae said something quiet. The maitre d' nodded 3 times in quick succession and gestured toward the private dining area near the back. Min-jae glanced that direction, then stopped. His eyes found me. I don't know why. The restaurant had 30 occupied tables. I was a woman sitting alone in a red dress with an untouched second wine glass across from her. But there were other solitary diners, other women, other tableaus of elegant Friday night Chicago. He should have looked past me the way powerful people look past ordinary things. He didn't. He looked at me with those utterly still eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then something shifted in his expression. Not softness. Not yet. More like recognition that, though, he had filed a piece of information and made an immediate decision. He said something to his men. They moved toward the private dining room without him. He walked toward me. Drop a comment below. Team Daniel or Team Min-jae. Let's see where you stand before everything changes. He pulled out the empty chair, Daniel's chair, and sat down. Not asked, Saturday I stared at him. He looked back at me the way someone looks at the horizon, calmly, with patience, waiting for the thing they already know is coming. Excuse me, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. That seat is empty, he said quietly. I know. I watched him leave. The word landed oddly. Leave, as though Daniel had been here, had walked out, rather than simply never arrived. As though this man had been watching my table long enough to map the entire shape of my evening. Who are you? I asked. Seo Min-jae, he said, with the particular evenness of a man who offers his name the way others offer a handshake. As a formality he is long outgrown. I didn't ask your name, I said. I asked who you are. Something moved behind his eyes. The closest thing to surprise I would see from him all night. That's a better question, he said. I'll answer it honestly, because I need something from you, and I prefer not to build it on a lie. I waited. The 2 men near the entrance. Don't look now. They've been following me for 11 days. They work for someone I have a complicated history with. If I am seen alone tonight, at this restaurant, that sends a message I cannot afford to send right now. If I am seen with someone who looks like we have been together for some time, it sends a different message entirely. I kept my expression neutral. I was already calculating. You want me to pretend to be your wife, I said. For 1 hour, he said. I'll compensate you for your time. However you prefer. I don't want your money. He tilted his head slightly. Reassessing. What do you want? I looked at him for a long moment. The piano was playing again. The men near the entrance. I did not look directly, but I could feel them in my peripheral vision, a kind of pressure the way a storm front creates pressure before it arrives. I want to know that I'm safe, I said. Whatever this is, whatever you're involved in, I want your word that sitting at this table with you doesn't put me in danger. You have it. And don't touch me, I said. Whatever performance we're giving, your hands stay on your side of the table. He looked at my hands, then back at my face. Agreed, he said immediately, without negotiation, without the kind of reassuring smile men deploy when they don't actually mean what they're saying. I believed him. I can't entirely explain why. Perhaps because the men who give you dangerous smiles are the ones you should watch. The men who give you nothing, who agree to your terms without theater, those are the ones who mean it. 1 hour, I said. 1 hour, he agreed. He reached across and refilled my wine glass from the bottle the waiter had left. Then he poured a glass for himself. He lifted it toward me. Not a toast, more like an acknowledgement. We began. What followed was the strangest performance of my life, and the most unexpectedly natural. He was exceptional at it. The posture of a man comfortable in his partner's company, the way he angled his body toward me just slightly, the way he spoke with the unhurried ease of someone who has nothing to prove. He didn't overdo it. No hand-holding, no manufactured laughter. Just presence, just attention, and God, the attention. The waiter returned. Min-jae ordered for us both. He had glanced at the menu for perhaps 4 seconds, and somehow landed on exactly the right choices. I noticed that. He asked me to confirm first. He did not assume. I noticed that too. I looked once, casually, toward the entrance. The two men were still there, drinks in hand, positioned where they could see every table. One of them was looking at us. I reached across the table and touched the back of Min-jae's hand. Just briefly. Just enough. He looked down at my hand, then up at me, and there was something in his expression that I wasn't prepared for. Not gratitude exactly. Not surprise. Something quieter than both. "Thank you," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "The hour hasn't finished." The corner of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly. It was, I would later understand, the closest thing Seo Min-jae had to a smile in the early days, that smallest possible movement at the edge of his control. "You look like someone who already had her heart broken tonight." The words came after silence. We were on our second course. The dangerous men near the entrance had ordered food, which meant they were settling in, which meant Min-jae was not going anywhere quickly, and neither was I. "He texted me," I said. I don't know why I said it. I wasn't planning to. "My fiancé. He texted to cancel the engagement." 3 sentences. No phone call. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. "I want to ask if you're all right," he said. "Good," I said. "Because the answer would be a polite lie." "Then we won't waste time on polite lies," he said. "There's enough of those in this room already." He meant the men watching him. But somehow, it felt like he meant everything. The whole architecture of my evening. The red dress. The planned speech. The future I had been carefully rehearsing. The hour was supposed to end. It didn't. At some point, I stopped tracking time and started tracking him instead. The way he held his fork, the precise economy of his movements, the way he paused before answering questions, not out of calculation, but out of something that looked almost like respect. As though your question deserved the dignity of actual thought before he replied. Daniel had always answered quickly. Daniel was quick about everything. Quick to speak, quick to commit, quick, apparently, to leave. There was a speed to his love that I had always mistaken for passion. Sitting across from a man who moved slowly and deliberately through every word and gesture, I began to understand the difference. "You prefer the Burgundy to the Bordeaux," Min-jae said, watching me. "You've been drinking the Burgundy steadily, but leaving the Bordeaux untouched." "You're very observant," I said. "It's useful," he said simply. "In your line of work," I said carefully. "In every line of work," he replied. "Most people just don't bother." He noticed the way I touched my right wrist when I was thinking, pressing my thumb to the inside of my wrist, as if checking for a pulse. That he noticed that I repositioned my fork 3 times before eating, always straightening it parallel to the plate's edge. That he noticed that I glanced toward the city view every few minutes, not with longing, but with something more technical, more analytical, as though the geometry of the skyline was something I was working through. "Architecture," he said. I looked at him sharply. "You look at buildings the way some people look at paintings," he said. "Like you're reading them." A long pause. "I used to study it," I said. "Architecture. At Columbia. I left in my 3rd year." "What?" No one had ever asked me that directly. Not even Nora, my best friend, who knew the whole story and had been careful with me about it for years. People who knew didn't ask why, because they understood the answer would cost me something to give. This man, who had known me for 50 minutes, asked it like a question that deserved an honest answer. "Because I decided I wasn't good enough," I said. "Because the program was competitive and brutal, and I had one bad semester, and instead of fighting through it, I convinced myself the bad semester was the truth about me." The words came out more clearly than I expected, more honestly. "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm a project coordinator at a real estate firm," I said. "I make sure other people's buildings get built on time. I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked," he said. I met his eyes. "Now I still draw," I said quietly. "At home. At night. I draw buildings no one will ever build." He was quiet for what felt like a long time. Outside, the city burned its nighttime electricity against the dark. "You didn't stop loving it," he said. "You only stopped believing you deserved it." The words hit somewhere I wasn't ready for. I looked down at my wine glass. I pressed my thumb to the inside of my wrist. "Don't do that," he said gently. "Do what?" "Check yourself. Like you need to verify you're still real." I didn't have an answer for that. I wasn't sure there was one. The men near the entrance left at 9:40. Min-jae tracked their exit without looking directly at them, a peripheral competence I was beginning to recognize as simply the way he moved through the world. He noted it, filed it, returned his attention to me. "The hour passed some time ago," he said. "I know," I said. "You could leave." "I know," I said again. Neither of us moved. We ordered dessert. He told me he didn't eat sugar, and then ate half of my creme brulee while explaining, without any apparent irony, that he didn't eat sugar. I didn't point out the contradiction. I liked that he had it. One small perfect human inconsistency in all that controlled precision. When the bill came, he settled it before I had reached for my bag. I didn't argue. It wasn't about money. It was about the fact that he did it the way you do things for people you have already decided matter. Not as performance, not as transaction, but as simple care. At the elevator, he stood slightly behind me, to my left. His men materialized from somewhere and fell into formation at a discrete distance. The world that existed around him, the machinery of caution, the arrangement of bodies in space, was becoming more visible to me and more real. "I'll have a car take you home," he said. "That's not necessary," I said. "I know it isn't," he said. "I'd like to do it anyway." The car arrived. Black, quiet, impeccable. I stood at the door. He stood 2 feet away, and I was acutely aware of those 2 feet, of the precise distance he maintained with a care that felt almost formal. "Thank you," I said. "For the dinner." I paused. "For asking better questions than I expected." He looked at me. "The man who abandoned you tonight," he said quietly, "made the worst mistake of his life." I got in the car. The door closed. We pulled into the current of Chicago's Friday night traffic, and I looked back through the rear window. He was still standing on the sidewalk, still watching. Not with longing, not yet. Just with that same unhurried attention, as though he wanted to make sure I was carried safely away before he turned to whatever the rest of his night required. I faced forward. I pressed my thumb to the inside of my wrist and felt my pulse, steady, alive, slightly faster than it should have been. I didn't understand it yet, but something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a door opening somewhere in a house you thought was sealed. "Still here?" "Good, because we're only halfway and the most dangerous part hasn't even started yet. If this story has you hooked, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next." 3 days passed. I went back to work. I answered emails. I sat in project meetings and made notes in my characteristic small, precise handwriting and said the right things at the right times. I called Nora on Tuesday evening and told her about Daniel, which required 40 minutes of her absolute fury on my behalf. She used the word coward 11 times, which I counted because the counting was easier than the feeling. I did not tell her about him. Not yet. I wasn't sure what I would say. I wasn't sure there was a language for what the evening at altitude had been. I had described it to myself several times and kept arriving at the same inadequacy. A dangerous man sat at my table, and 2 hours later, I felt more known than I had in 14 months of engagement. I told myself it was the grief of the breakup. I told myself I was romanticizing a business arrangement, a stranger's convenient use of a convenient woman. I told myself these things with the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent a long time managing their own interior. On Thursday morning, there was a white orchid on my desk. No note, no card, no explanation. Just the orchid in a slender glass vase, white and impossibly precise, sitting on my desk as though it had always been there. I asked the front desk. The receptionist said it had arrived by courier at 8:15 a.m. The courier had not provided a name. I sat down at my desk. I looked at the orchid for a long time. I told myself it could be anyone. I knew it wasn't anyone. The call came at 6:47 p.m. My phone screen displayed an unknown number with a Chicago area code. I stared at it for 2 full rings before answering. Elena. Just my name. One word. But his voice alone changed the quality of the air. It was that specific and that absurd. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "I have resources," he said. That's either reassuring or alarming. In my experience, he said, those two things are rarely as far apart as people prefer to believe. A beat of silence. Comfortable silence. The kind that, between strangers, should feel awkward but somehow didn't. "The orchid was from you," I said. "You saw them at dinner. On the table arrangements. You looked at them for a long time." I had. I hadn't known I'd been observed doing it. I'd like to have dinner with you again, he said. Properly this time. Not as a performance. I was quiet. You should know, he said, and his voice shifted slightly. The smallest acknowledgement that what he was about to say cost him something. That I have not done this in a long time. Asked. This specifically. I am better at arrangements than at asking. Why me? I said. You could have chosen anyone at that restaurant. Yes, he said. I chose you. That's not an answer. You sat alone in a red dress after your heart was broken, and you did not cry, he said. Not because you weren't hurt. Because you decided the room didn't deserve your tears. That kind of strength is rare. I found it. He paused. Interesting. Interesting, I repeated. Extraordinary, he corrected quietly. I said yes. I told myself it was curiosity. I told myself I was being careful, clear-eyed, a grown woman who could have dinner with an interesting stranger and walk away intact. I believe about half of that. The restaurant he chose for our second dinner was nothing like Altitude. It was called Fiorello's, a small Italian place in Wicker Park, the kind of establishment that doesn't advertise, that has no social media presence, where the menu is handwritten on a chalkboard and the pasta is made in-house and the walls are covered in photographs of someone's actual family. You would walk past it 100 times and never notice it was there. There were bodyguards, 2 of them, at a table near the door, dressed down, inconspicuous unless you knew to look. I noticed them immediately. Min-jae noticed me noticing. A necessary habit, he said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for being careful, I said. Tell me instead why you need to be. He looked at me steadily. I run certain business interests that operate outside the boundaries that other people find comfortable, he said. That is the most honest version I can offer you without putting information into a conversation that doesn't yet need to carry it. Criminal, I said. Complicated, he said. Are those the same thing? Often, he said. Sometimes not. The distinction is rarely as clean as the law suggests. I thought about that. I should have been afraid. I should have been pushing back my chair and leaving. Instead, I was thinking about the structural integrity of his honesty, the way he didn't dress it up, didn't perform respectability he didn't have, didn't ask me to overlook anything. He offered me the shape of the truth and let me decide what to do with it. We ate. He was different here, less formal, slightly more human. He told me about his mother. She had died 6 years ago, lung cancer, a 3-month collapse from diagnosis to end. She had been a high school music teacher in Evanston, a small, fierce Korean woman who had come to Chicago at 23 with $40 and a piano certificate and built a life through sheer specific stubbornness. He talked about her with the particular restraint of someone who has disciplined themselves not to grieve in front of others. And the restraint itself was the grief. You could see it at the edges of every sentence. She would have had opinions about me, he said. What I became. What kind of opinions? Complicated ones, he said. The kind that love you and judge you simultaneously. The best kind, I said. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen from him before. Openness. Just for a moment, like a window in a stone building. Unexpected. She would have liked you, he said. After dinner we walked. His bodyguards maintained their distance, close enough to be useful, far enough to give us the feeling of privacy. The Chicago River ran alongside us, dark and moving, the bridges lit from below, the city stacked above us in layers of light and steel. He told me about the loneliness. He didn't call it that. He called it the cost of particular choices, the way certain kinds of power require a perimeter, and the perimeter keeps things out that should maybe come in. But I heard loneliness underneath every careful phrase. I told him about Columbia, not the edited version I gave most people, the I decided to take a different path version that let me avoid the real story, but the actual version. The semester my father got sick, and I flew home every weekend and fell behind in studio and panicked, and instead of asking for help, I simply withdrew, quietly, efficiently, leaving behind the version of myself that had believed she could build things. And the girl who left, he asked. The one who withdrew. Is she still in there? She's been waiting to be let out for 7 years, I said. He stopped walking. The river moved beside us. A cold wind came off the water and lifted my hair. There's something I want to say to you, he said, and I want to say it clearly, because I think you deserve clarity more than you deserve comfortable vagueness. I turned to face him. My life has consequences, he said, not abstractions. Real consequences that have reached real people who are close to me. I want you to know that before anything else develops between us, if you stay close to me, eventually those consequences will reach you too. The city noise washed softly around us. A boat moved under the nearest bridge. Is that a warning or an exit? I asked. It's a choice, he said. I'm giving it to you while you still have it cleanly. I looked at him. This man who had sat at my broken table and paid attention, who had sent a white orchid and said extraordinary when he meant it, who was standing on a riverbank in the cold telling me the truth about himself when a lesser man would have hidden behind charm. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking, he said. He walked me to my building. He waited until I was inside the lobby. Then he turned and walked back into the dark like someone who was very used to doing that. I stood at the elevator and thought about consequences. I thought about them for exactly 4 days. The consequences arrived before I had finished thinking about them. It was a Tuesday, lunch hour. I had walked 3 blocks from the office to the farmer's market that sets up on the plaza every week. I went every Tuesday, always bought the same things, always took the same route back. Routine is its own kind of comfort, its own predictable safety. The man fell in a step beside me on the second block. He was unremarkable in every deliberate way. Medium height, gray jacket, a face that had been arranged to be forgotten. He didn't look at me. He simply walked beside me and spoke in a tone so conversational that someone watching from 10 feet away would have thought we knew each other. Ms. Brooks, he said, tell Min-jae the debt isn't settled. Tell him the arrangement he made in December was a preliminary agreement, not a final one. Tell him we expect the balance by the end of the month. He peeled away at the corner and was gone. I stood on the sidewalk with a paper bag of vegetables and felt the ground shift under the city's foundation. He knew my name. He knew my lunch route. He knew where I worked. My hands were shaking. I noticed them shaking the way you notice something that belongs to someone else, clinically, from a distance. I walked back to the office. I sat at my desk. I stared at the white orchid, which had not been replaced, but which I had not been able to throw away either, its blooms now slightly past their peak. I called Min-jae. He picked up on the first ring. Elena. Someone spoke to me today, I said. On the street. He knew my name. He had a message for you. A very short, very complete silence. Tell me exactly what he said. I did. Word for word. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. Later. That even then, even frightened, I had the presence to remember every word exactly. Are you at your office? He asked. Yes. Stay there. Don't leave the building. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Min-jae, 20 minutes, he said. Then, more quietly, I'm sorry, Elena. I'm very sorry this reached you. He was there in 18. He came into the lobby, and I met him there, and what I saw in his face was not the careful composure of the man from the restaurant. It was something raw, controlled fury, yes, the control intact, but underneath it a heat that told me exactly how angry he was. Angry at the man who had approached me. Angry at himself. He looked at me. A full scan, the way you look at something you need to verify, is undamaged. And then something in his shoulders released by perhaps 1 degree. You're all right, he said. I'm all right, I confirmed. I should have told you more, he said. About the December situation. I should have. You told me consequences were possible, I said. You were honest about that. Telling you consequences were possible and having them arrive at your lunch route are 2 different things. Yes, I said. They are. We sat in the lobby chairs. His security arranged themselves discreetly at the exits. He told me about the December arrangement, a debt negotiation with a rival organization that had gone partly sideways, a balance that remained disputed, a group of men who believed that pressure could be applied through personal contact rather than direct confrontation. He told me this in the same way he always spoke, clearly, without dressing it up. This is the world, he said. This is what I warned you about. And I would understand, completely, if this is where you make a different choice. I looked at him. I thought about Daniel. About 3 sentences and no phone call. About the 14 months I'd spent being the reliable one, the steady one, the one who didn't demand much, because I had told myself that was strength. I thought about what it meant to be chosen by someone who had options, genuinely chosen, seen, considered, versus settling for someone who kept you because you were convenient. I thought about the word consequences. Real, physical, appearing at your lunch route consequences. This was not romantic abstraction. This was the actual shape of the risk. And then I thought about what I'd seen in his face when he walked into the lobby. The fury on my behalf. The self-reproach. The single degree of relief when he confirmed I was unheard. There's a specific thing that happens when you realize someone's genuine care for you. Not performed care, not convenient care, but care that costs them something. It moves through you differently than other feelings. It doesn't sweep. It settles. I'm not leaving, I said. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Elena, I'm not leaving, I said again, more clearly. Not because I'm naive about what this is. Because I see what's underneath it. And what's underneath it is worth something. To me. A long silence. You shouldn't be this brave, he said. It makes everything more complicated. You shouldn't be this careful with people, I said. Given your profession. It's inconsistent. That smallest movement at the edge of his mouth. That almost smile. There's something I want to show you, he said. He pulled out his phone. He opened a set of architectural renders. A mixed-use development project his organization was financing on the north side of the city. Residential, commercial, community space. A serious project. The renders were competent but cold, technically accurate without any life. The firm I hired left the project 2 weeks ago, he said. Contractual dispute. I need someone to come in and handle the design vision. Someone who understands what a building can be beyond what it needs to be. I looked at the renders. My hands had stopped shaking somewhere in the last 15 minutes. I was looking at a building that needed to be thought about differently. The orientation was wrong for the light. The green space was an afterthought. The residential facades were uniform in a way that would make the whole thing feel institutional rather than inhabited. I can see 12 things wrong with these already, I said. I know, he said. That's why I'm asking you. This isn't charity, I said. You need to say that clearly. It's not charity, he said. You'll be paid a competitive rate, and you'll earn it. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm making a decision about talent. The favor, if there is one, runs the other direction. I looked at the renders for a long time. 7 years. The girl in the elevator at Columbia, pressing the lobby button, telling herself the right decision is the safe decision. I'll need to review the full site brief, I said. I'll have it sent to you tonight. And I'll need to be able to make actual design decisions. Not just execute someone else's vision. The project is yours if you want it, he said. The vision is yours entirely. I sat back in the lobby chair. Outside, Chicago was moving through its Tuesday afternoon. Buses and bikes, and the ordinary human insistence on forward motion. All right, I said. All right, he said, and something that had been closed for 7 years opened, quietly, like a window that had only ever been stuck, not locked. Months passed. The project consumed me in the best possible way. The way real work does when it finally aligns with who you actually are rather than who you've been willing to settle for being. I redesigned the orientation of the South residential wing to maximize afternoon light. I argued for a public courtyard at the center of the development, a proper one with trees and seating that would still be there in 30 years when the trees were large. I stayed late at the site on weekends, sometimes alone, walking the outlines of rooms that didn't exist yet, thinking in 3 dimensions again. Nora came to see the site one Saturday afternoon in October. She stood in the marked foundation of what would be the community center, looked around at the chalk lines and the sky, and said, Elena, this is real. I know, I said. This is who you're supposed to be, she said. I didn't argue with her. I had stopped arguing with things that were true. I told Nora about Min-jae that Saturday. All of it. The red dress, the empty chair, the dangerous man who sat down and paid attention, the orchid, the riverbank warning, the man with the gray jacket and the message, the lobby, the project. All of it. Nora was quiet for a long time after I finished. He scares me, she said finally. His world scares me. Me too, I said. That's not actually the part I'm deciding about. Then what is? Whether a person's world is their whole definition, I said, or whether what they do with their attention, who they choose to see, and how carefully they see them, is also part of who they are. Nora looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, You already love him. I didn't answer her, but I didn't disagree, either. The morning I knew for certain was quiet. That's what I remember most about it. The quality of the quiet, the specific texture of an early November morning when Chicago hasn't fully committed to winter yet and the light is pale and uncertain and the city sounds are muffled. He had stayed the night, for the 3rd time, The details of how we arrived at that still tender in my memory, still private. And I was in the kitchen making coffee. He was sitting at the counter with his phone, reading something, and he had not put on his jacket yet, and his collar was open and the tattoo at his throat was fully visible. A phrase in Korean characters that I had asked about once, and he had translated quietly, "What endures?" The coffee maker finished. I poured 2 cups. I handed him his, and our fingers overlapped for a moment around the ceramic, and he looked up from his phone. The morning light came through the window at a low, November angle and landed across the counter between us, and I looked at him, and I knew. The way you know things that are simply, irreducibly true. Not because you decided them, but because they declared themselves. "I love you," I said. I hadn't planned to say it. There was no calculated moment, no perfect setup. It just arrived, simple and declarative, the way all the most real things do. He set his phone down. He set his coffee cup down. He came around the counter and stood in front of me, and for a moment he just looked at me, with those utterly still eyes that I had learned, over months, to read as the surface of something much deeper. Then he said, "I knew before you did." He said it without arrogance, without triumph, with only the particular tenderness of a man who has been carrying something carefully for a long time and can finally set it down. He crossed the remaining distance, and when he put his hand against my face, his touch was careful in exactly the way his attention had always been careful, precise, purposeful, like something you've thought through and chosen completely. We stood in the November light in my kitchen with our coffee getting cold on the counter, and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to feel like. This specific thing. This. There are images I return to. The blueprints spread across my dining table at midnight, covered in red markup from a meeting that had gone long, and the pride I felt looking at them. Not borrowed pride, not approximated pride, but the clean, solid kind that comes from actual work. The river walk in October, him slightly behind me, and to the left the way he always walked. A habit I understood now was protective, positioning himself between me and any approach from the street, and the ease I had learned to feel inside the architecture of his caution. The empty table at altitude on the night, I walked past it 3 months later, on my way to meet Nora for a drink. I stopped and looked at it. Table 12. Window seat. The city below still blazing with its ordinary, extraordinary electricity. I thought about the woman who had sat there in a red dress and pressed her thumb to her wrist and refused to cry. I was proud of her. The orchid on my windowsill at home. The third one, still blooming, a small, reliable, white declaration. And Min-jae in the morning light. The open collar. The tattoo. The coffee cooling on the counter. The particular expression of a man who has found something he did not know he was looking for and is now completely terrified of losing it. The night I thought my life ended. The night Daniel sent 3 sentences and no phone call. The night I sat alone in a red dress in the finest restaurant in Chicago and held myself together with both hands, was the night it finally began. I understand now what Seo Min-jae understood before I did, that the most significant thresholds in a life rarely announce themselves. They look like an empty chair. They look like a buzzing phone and 3 sentences and a man who doesn't deserve your tears. They look like loss, specifically and precisely like loss, until you look back from the other side and understand that what you experienced was not an ending. It was an opening, a dangerous, extraordinary, consequence-carrying opening, walked into by a woman in a red dress who refused to cry in public, toward a man in a dark suit with a tattoo that said, "What endures?" What endures? I think about that phrase often. I think about what it asks, what you have to be willing to carry, and to risk, and to remain. I think I'm beginning to understand. But loving a man like Seo Min-jae always comes with a price, and neither of us knew the most dangerous part was still waiting. If this story moved you, shocked you, or gave you feelings, subscribe so you never next one. Hit like if you think Daniel deserved everything he got. Drop a comment below. What do you think the most dangerous part is? And be honest. Are you Team Min-jae? Because same.